Hey guys, Grindhead Jim here with another video for you. Today I wanted to talk about why I collect, like how it came to be that I became a collector. And that's a fair question. I don't really think about it that much myself, because there's definitely a difference between someone who has games in a collection and someone who actively collects games. I kind of feel like I'm somewhere in the middle, even though leaning heavily towards collector. I'll explain. I first started gaming with the Atari and the ColecoVision. Those were the two consoles that my family had. My grandparents had an Atari, my aunt and uncle had a ColecoVision, and my family had a black and white Pong console, as well as a ColecoVision of our own. Although I'd played the NES and the Sega Master System at some of my friends' houses over the years, we didn't have an NES until 1989. All we had from the time I was born until 1989 was an Atari, Pong console, built into a black and white TV, and a ColecoVision. That's it. But we had a lot of games for those systems. We had 20 to 30 games for each system at a bare minimum, and there was never a lack of a game to play. So I guess you could say, from the ground up, it was ingrained in me that when you had a system, you got as many games as you could afford. When you combine that with the fact that my dad also instilled in me this idea that you always want to be not necessarily a whole generation behind, but a couple years behind the new curve. The reason behind that is that the technology becomes less expensive, more software becomes available, and so on. And that's kind of the way I was brought up. Wait a little bit, spend a little less, and get more. And with a few exceptions, that's how I've done things to this day. Even when I get a console when it launches, I get a couple titles that I know I'm going to play for a while. I don't buy anything for close to a year. That way I can see what's good, what isn't, what I want, and what I don't want. And that's how I approach the PlayStation 1 and the PlayStation 4. Everything else, I more or less got well after it had launched. When I got my NES system in 1989, I thought I was going to have to buy it after Christmas. My parents had made me save for the NES because I wanted one so bad. Turns out, because my mother worked at the school that I went to, she found out how well I was doing with my grades, talked it over with my father, and they agreed that I had earned the system and I should use the money to buy the games that I wanted as a way of kind of showing me that hard work pays off, sometimes in ways you don't expect. And it is something that taught me a valuable lesson. Save your money, bide your time, get what you really want, and don't compromise. Now, I don't always follow that, but it's generally good advice. Thanks, Mom and Dad. I miss you. Not to get too dark here, but it bears mentioning that both of my parents are gone. I'm in my 40s. They still died a bit younger than I would have liked. They're gone. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that for a sob story. I tell you that because it does play heavily into why I still collect games. It reminds me of all the memories I had getting games, playing games, asking them for a game, and those two parents, my mother and father, were amazing. They always were good, especially around Christmas time, at going above and beyond. I remember very specifically a few weeks before Christmas in 1990, there was a list of games that had recently gone on sale. You have to figure this is 1990. This is several years into the NES library's life. And there were some great titles that were 10 to 20 bucks. I'm talking Boy and His Blob, RC Pro-Am, Double Dragon, and the list goes on. And I picked out all the titles on that list that I thought I would have a good time playing. I didn't pick all those titles. I picked the ones that I thought would be the most fun. In kid logic, if you wish for 20 things, you might get 5. And those 5 are going to be something you really want. That was always my philosophy when I was asking for stuff. And my parents typically did that. They were kind of the folks that would make sure that you got what you wanted, but they didn't want you asking for one thing and then knowing you'll get it, because that kind of spoils the fun of gift giving. So they went ahead and did that. This particular year, they got me every single game on my list. I got Super Mario Bros. 3. I got Turtles Arcade, which had just come out that week and was notoriously hard to find in retail stores. My mother didn't understand my reaction when I got it because I didn't think it was possible that she would even find it let alone that she'd be willing to pay, the full retail price for the game. Because, 50, $60 for one game, when you're looking at multiple games that cost less, it made sense to me that I wouldn't get that game. As far as I was concerned, I asked for it as like a pie in the sky, figuring if I'm lucky, I'll get it for Easter or my birthday or something like that, or I'll just save up and get it myself. But I asked for it because I knew it was coming out. I don't know how she did it, but she got it. Super Mario 3, Turtles 2, and then every one of those bargain games I asked for came in a big box individually wrapped. RC Pro-Am, Dragon Spirit, Double Dragon I had mentioned before, Boy and His Blob. I'm trying to think of the other games that were in there, but I just don't remember at this point because it was such an overwhelming feeling, and I'm linking myself more to the feeling of generosity and that joy of, I have these. And by that point, I was very appreciative of my parents getting me these kinds of things, and it was something I knew I would spend a lot of time with. And just with the other collections that I had of cassette tapes, or later it would be, music CDs or records, toys. I was never the guy that would take things outside and make them dirty or, bust up my G.I. Joes or whatever. Anything that I had, I did my best to take very good care of because it's mine and I want it for as long as I can have it. Something my father instilled in me. He always said, if you take care of your things, they'll take care of you. And that was always quite true. So you never really saw me outside playing with my action figures. If I'm playing outside, I'm riding a bike or playing baseball or something like that. Toys were an inside thing for me. And video games, of course, were inside, because who takes their NES outside? Go along, Johnny, I'll hit it to you. Seriously, don't ever do that with your equipment. But because it was so important to me and to my folks that I kept things nice, that's just what I did. So I would keep things very neatly stacked. I made sure the manuals were always with them. They were in the sleeves all the time. I tended not to leave games in the system if I wasn't playing them. I didn't leave the system on for long periods of time unless I was really going after something special in a game like Ninja Gaiden or something like that. I wasn't that guy. I really tended to try and keep things good. And to be honest, the NES that I had that I got in '89 was the NES that I had until I lost my NES. And by lost, I mean I made a very poor living arrangement decision and immediately regretted that decision and vacated the premises way too quickly, but I left all of my games there. Yes, all of my video games were left behind. Some eventually made their way back into my possession when I went back with my parents and got all of my stuff, but it had been clear that my then roommate had picked clean what was there for what he wanted. To be fair, under the circumstances, I'm gonna be honest here, I didn't leave on good terms, and I don't think that he didn't deserve something in terms of compensation. On both sides, it was an awful situation. I don't have any ill will. The only negative emotions I have from that is that I made a dumb decision. So that means that my NES, all my NES games, my PlayStation, and most of my PlayStation games, no, all of my PlayStation games, were basically gone. That would have been 1999. That was 10 years after the fact, right? And so now I went from having a pretty well-curated, very well-taken care of collection to having scraps. I had a few controllers, maybe a game here or there, and that was it. And I was about to join the Marine Corps, where I was not going to have any real use for video games for quite some time. It wasn't until a year later that I got my hands on another PlayStation, which was very graciously donated to me by a Navy friend of mine and his wife. I also went to a pawn shop and got a copy of Spider-Man on the PS1, which I loved, as well as a copy of Tecmo's Deception, which is still one of my favorite PS1 games of all time. That, as far as I am concerned, is the beginning of my collecting in earnest, because I made a promise to myself that I would never get rid of anything that I wanted. The promise I should have made was never to get rid of anything, but I will explain. This was 2001. I was very young. I was married at the time. That marriage only lasted a couple years. We split up. And prior to this, me getting video games wasn't something that was very welcome in the house. I only got a game here, a game there, nothing big. She just didn't understand the buying of things. Nothing against her, it just wasn't her jam. So out of respect for her, I didn't do a lot of it. But when we split, of course, that's pretty much one of the first things that I did. I went out and I bought a PS2 and a slew of games, which by that point, because we were a year or two into the life cycle of that system, they were relatively inexpensive. So the marriage ending, though a negative process, did ultimately hold me to my standard of not getting games or systems until they were a bit older. So I appreciate that. And I know it's weird to thank your ex for giving you a gift of tradition, but she did, and I do thank her for that. Fast forward another 2 years, and now I'm getting remarried. We went to Target, of all places, to register for our wedding. You know, boop, 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 you scan stuff. And we scanned anything that looked pretty good that we wouldn't normally buy for ourselves or things that we would forget to buy. Only a couple pie-in-the-sky things. One of the pie-in-the-sky things was an original Xbox, a copy of Halo, and a copy of Ninja Gaiden. We got those for our wedding. Those of you that watch my Twitch streams may know someone, a moderator, named Jill the Ripper. She was the one that got us that for that wedding. That was 15 years ago. Over the years, my interest in gaming didn't wane, but my focus in gaming kind of had an ebb and flow. When the 360 came out, I did get one. I didn't get rid of my original Xbox right away. I had amassed a nice collection of things in terms of games or controllers, accessories, things like that. And at some point, we did trade in the console and some games so that we could get more Xbox 360 games. I regret that. Because again, when you're taking good care of your things, you know they're going to be fine. You should just keep them. You know, we probably should have just waited and bought the things outright or found them used or I don't know. But the thing is, when you're in a relationship, sometimes you make compromises, and I wanted to make sure she had what she wanted too. And in the end, it was worth it because she got what she needed and there was less clutter, stuff like that. Somewhere in the middle of all that, we had been given a Nintendo 64. I don't remember where. I think it might have belonged to her when she was younger, or if we got it from a friend. I don't remember. We had a handful of games, good controllers, it was in great condition, but we never played it. Never. And it wasn't something I had any interest in at the time. She didn't have any interest in it. And one night, while we were having a bit of a kegger party at my house, Brandon was like, wow, you have a Nintendo 64? I'm like, yeah, but we don't ever use it. Can I play it? I'm like, I'd really rather you not hook it up. I says, if you really are that excited about it, I'll get you a bag. You can take it home. Really? Yeah, totally. Here, you can have it. On one hand, it was going to a home that deserved it. This guy really wanted it. He was a really close friend. He had done a lot for us. So giving him the console and the games, I don't regret for a second from the standpoint of giving it to someone who's going to love it. Collector me now, a decade later, is like, man, I should have kept that because now I'm in the market for an N64. What the hell am I thinking? The reason I'm telling these stories is to kind of build to the point where you understand that even though I've always believed in taking care of things and keeping them, I've made mistakes, and I think we all have, even well into adulthood, okay? So that marriage ended much more amicably, I might add, and there was kind of a lull in my game collecting because money was very tight. By that point, I was a full-time professional musician, and it was very hard to stay afloat. So I kind of concentrated on the games that I had, and you know, if a fan was able to give me a game or something like that, I was all too happy to accept it and play it. But for the most part, I just kind of played what I had for a very long time. I left the music industry in 2011, and I moved from Chicago to Iowa. Got a good job with a technology company, and next thing I knew, I had my own place again. I had a very nice space, and I had money not to burn, but I had money to spend. So I started buying games again. I got a lot more into it again. This is where our Deus Ex comes in, and I start getting into things. And the 360 treated me very well in that sense. Lots of games were out by that time, a myriad of games. It was one of the most popular consoles that have ever existed. Almost more popular than the NES. Arguably, it might be. Depends on who you talk to. So I had a lot of 360 games, but my original PS2 was long gone by then, but at some point I had picked up a PS2 Slim, and I'd gotten a few games along the way for it. But generally speaking, most of the time I'm playing on this 360, and not having a bad time at it. In 2012, that job that I had at the technology company fell through. There was a lot of structural changes, it came very quickly, and I wasn't prepared for it, and now I found myself without a job. But with a fairly nice severance package where I was able to survive for quite a while. And I decided to take the opportunity to rebuild some of my collection. And it was born from watching a lot of Angry Video Game Nerd and a few other YouTubers, like the Game Chasers and so forth, and just really going, man, I gotta get back into this. That's when it started for me. Truly hardcore, making the promise never to get rid of stuff. I started with an NES, an SNES, and as many of the games that I had that I remember that I really liked, games that I rented that I never had, as well as some hidden gems that I could find for good prices along the way. I don't mind telling you that I got Metal Storm with a manual in mint condition for $30. And I also started making my own custom game cases at that point. A lot of you know about the Cover Project, and I was pointed in the direction of that by NES Complex. And there's a video on one of my channels where I'm showing how bruised one of my hands was from clipping out these universal game cases for hours at a time. And I'm like, it's your fault, man. It's your fault. But I never lost the taste for it. I love having the games in cases, on shelves. It's something that will probably always be a part of collecting for me. In fact, when I have more space, I'm probably going to get a couple more crates of the cases just to make sure I always have a ready supply, so that as my collection grows, I don't have to wait or spend unexpected money to get the collection where it needs to be. If you want to know more about how that works, let me know, and I can either get you a link to the NES Complex video that started me on the whole thing, or I can make a video about it myself, or I think I even have an archive of my Twitch stream where I actually make some on stream. So I'm just going at it. I'm getting NES, SNES, Genesis, Dreamcast, true Dreamcast if memory serves, and I'm collecting like crazy. PS1, PS2, NES, SNES, the list goes on. And I was focusing a lot on Dreamcast a bit too because I didn't know a lot about it, and I'm still somewhere in the middle on that, but I found some good games at good prices, making sure everything had a nice immaculate case. Now, I tend to keep all of my disc-based games in DVD cases, which I know is anathema to a lot of you. However, I do keep all the inserts, all of the booklets, and everything in the same case. I just keep them in the booklet tray. The reason I do this is, one, so everything looks uniform on the shelf. Two, a lot of times those old jewel cases come broken, those spindles get broken, you know, something's wrong, or it's just dirty. So for me, if it ever gets to a point where I want to remake the collection on CD cases, I'm just going to buy a bunch of blank CD cases and rebuild them myself. That will probably never happen, but I want you to know that if I ever have a Dreamcast or a PS1 or a PS2 game that is complete, that came the way it's supposed to, I have everything you need to put it in a proper case. So don't worry, I'm not that guy. And that did start in part because I was getting a lot of disc-only games as well, so I had to make cases for them. And because I loved the PS1 and PS2 games having the same kind of spine on them, that's where it started. And they're beautiful. And again, props to the Cover Project for making that possible. Amazing work, amazing people. Check them out. It's great, great stuff. So now that I've basically told you my life story in collecting, you know, the big question that has yet truly to be answered is, why do I collect? Why is this important to me? I believe that physical games need to be preserved as much as they possibly can be. I am also a guy that believes in having multiple ways to play games, if at all possible. I like the feeling of having something physical in your hands that gives you a happy feeling, whether it's a memory or just knowing the game is good, or just being able to say, hey, I've got this. I love sharing with people. I love having them come to my house and you know, them going to themselves and go, oh my God, you have this? That's to me a cool feeling, because not so much from the, oh yeah, I have it, but because seeing the smile on their face because they've never seen it before, or they haven't seen it since they were a kid. Totally worth it. And it can be a pain, and then there's time you invest, there's money you invest, but the dividends of happiness it gives me and the people that I interact with is worth it. And the community, it cannot be understated that they're a huge part of why I collect, because it's just being able to, again, share memories, share war stories, and have people go, wow, that's a good deal you got on that. And it feels good that people understand, can relate, and you form bonds over this. And really, it's not that much different than any other hobby that's out there, whether it's woodworking or being into fantasy football or, working on cars. Like, everyone has a different thing. But video gaming, I think, has a deeper passion because there's a bit of a historical thing to it. Though one could make that argument for most of the hobbies that I mentioned. But ultimately, for me, it's about happiness and joy. Being able to have a tangible thing that produces a positive feeling. That's really all that it is for me. I love playing games, and I love collecting games. I love sharing them with other people, and I love what the experiences give me in terms of social interaction with other people. That is why I am a collector. But enough about me. Why do you collect? Do you consider yourself a collector? And bear in mind that it doesn't mean you have to have everything. You can have a collection for you. And we'll be talking about that in a future video. Tell me how you feel about collecting as a hobby, as a pastime, as an investment, however you view it. But tell me below. And if you like these sort of discussions, or you just like this video, hit me with a like. It helps the channel. Hit subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell, because that means you're not going to miss anything. Because you know what? We have a lot more to talk about. My name's Grindhead Jim. Thank you for stopping by today. May all your grinds be merry, and I hope you have a great one. We'll see you next time, guys. Cheers.